If you're working 60, 70, 80 plus hours a week, but your revenue is staying flat, then in this video, I'm going to show you 3 ways in which you can hopefully solve that. My name's Elliott. Over the last 8 years or so, I've generated well in excess of £150 million in direct sales for my portfolio of private clients. I built and sold a 7-figure marketing agency, and I'm now building Entrepreneur Circle from an 8-figure business to a 9-figure business. And I have worked with loads of businesses, and I still do work with a lot of businesses very hands-on, one-on-one in my private little community. And one of the big things that comes up is how busy people are, but how the busyness does not directly correlate with the growth in revenue. And so I've got 3 things that are going to help that. I'm going to cover a time study that I did that will absolutely blow your mind. I'm going to show you the difference between £10 an hour work and £100 an hour work. And I'm going to show you how I use a simple 3-step calendar system that really is really simple, but that helps me stay on top and protect my super valuable time. So let's dive in. Number 1, the time study. So this was a story from when I did some private consulting with a client, and this client was a big construction company here in the UK. They did about £30 million a year, and they had a big sales team, okay? The sales team would go out and they would close these multiple 6, 7-figure deals, so very, very big deals. They'd just come off the back of this bumper year where revenue had grown massively. They'd hired more salespeople, but now revenue was slowing down. It was actually down really significantly year on year. And so my task was to figure out why and then ultimately to fix it. And so, like with anything, the first thing I wanted to do was look at some data and figure out what is actually going on. We've got all these new salespeople, all this additional resource, but it's not translating into additional sales. So what is going on? So the first thing I did was look at the inflow of leads in the marketing, and that was all good. We were getting more leads than the year before. So there was something going on in the sales process. So I tasked the sales team to do a time study. Very simple time study, you probably heard of it, where I gave them an Excel spreadsheet, and for 2 weeks they tracked every 15 minutes of their time to see what they were doing, what they were spending it on. So after 2 weeks I get the results back, and it was magnificent. It was so interesting. So I went through and I color-coded all of their time. Green if it was spent on revenue-driven activities, and red if it was spent on non-revenue-driven activities, aka things that do not have a direct tie to making sales and driving revenue. And lo and behold, to my complete dismay, 50% of their time was spent on basically admin bollocks. Literally sending little emails, organizing things, meeting notes, like stuff that needs to happen for sure, but not stuff that you need your sales team that you're paying 6-figure salaries that are closing these multi-million-pound deals to be spending 50% of their time on. So this was a huge revelation, and luckily it meant there was an easy fix, because we could simply hire someone for £2,000 a month who could basically do all of the admin work, and that would free up the sales team to focus on these revenue-driven actions, following up with leads, chasing their prospects more, working on the sales process, you name it, okay? Things that actually drive revenue and have a meaningful impact. So that was a huge revelation, and lo and behold, revenue basically tripled after we were able to go in, find that problem, and then fix it. All from doing a very simple time study. So I challenge you, if you've never done a time study before, you should do one on yourself, do one on your team. I promise it will be the most productive week when everyone knows they're tracking their time, but also it will give you real clarity as to whether or not they're spending enough time on these revenue-driven actions. Because fundamentally, if you, especially you, if you're watching this and you're a business owner, if you're spending your time doing £10 an hour work, then the brutal truth is you don't own a business, you own a job. And the £10 an hour stuff, this is emails, this is calendar organization, scheduling meetings, editing videos, even like a lot of customer service now, like responding to customers. And this is all work that can be easily outsourced to someone for a relatively low price per hour. Now, on the flip side, we have £1,000 an hour work. This is stuff like creating ads, creating sales assets, actually doing sales calls, improving your sales process, networking, building offers, creating content, all stuff that has the possibility to drive big amounts of revenue, and thus when you calculate a hourly rate on it, it's ginormous, okay? And depending on your business, it's gonna vary from £1,000 to 10,000 plus. And so you wanna make sure you're spending the majority of your time on £1,000 an hour work. And this can be very hard in business, because I remember when I started my agency back in 2020, I launched it, initially went out to a few people that I knew and pitched them and managed to get a few clients on board. And the first 2 months, I mean, I was working 100 hours a week, doing literally everything, creating the ads, designing landing pages, building landing pages, but also doing all the admin, okay? I was sending out invoices, scheduling all the meetings, all the other business, financial, admin, bookkeeping, all that kind of shit. And man, it was so stressful. It was so stressful. So it only took me 2 months before I hired a virtual assistant for like £15 an hour. And immediately I gave all of the admin to them, and it made such a profound impact on my life. Now, I think I was quite lucky in that sense, because I just hated admin work because I wasn't very good at it. It was very tedious and I just didn't fucking like it. So I could not wait to literally get it off my plate. But I know from many business owners that I've worked with that they love it. They love doing a bit of admin because actually the little simple tasks are really easy for them. And it feels good to tick them off the list. It feels good to get them out of the way, and it feels like you're being productive when actually all you've done is some low value work that instead you could have used that time on some £1,000 an hour work and actually meaningfully drove some more revenue into your business. And so it is a challenge, but for me that opened up the absolute floodgates, because then that freed me up. I could now get more clients. I spent my time on revenue driven actions, advertising, sales calls, getting more clients, and all of a sudden business grew, revenue grew, work grew. And so what did I do? I hired more people, got more people involved, got them to help out, and the business began to grow and grow and grow. And so it's a real hard initial milestone to get past, is actually getting help in the first place. But once you do, you won't be able to stop. And your whole purpose as a business owner is to constantly make sure your time is being spent on these revenue driven actions by bringing in support and getting people's help on everything that is non-revenue driving. Now, the problem here though is, okay, you might realize you need help, but you're not quite sure how to actually delegate and how to get people to do these things for you. Because I know a guy who has an estate agency business, and he has driven himself into the ground over and over again. Almost every 12 months he burns out because he is a real, quote unquote perfectionist, and he does things in an amazing way. He's highly skilled, he's very passionate, he loves what he does, and he, the way he does viewings to the way he follows up is just meticulous, okay? It's top notch. But his challenge is, he is so scared to delegate this stuff out to other people because he knows they will not be able to do it at the same level of quality that he can. And again, this is a massive myth, a massive limiting belief that you need to bust through. So I think it's Dan Martell has a great phrase that 80% done by someone else is 100% awesome. And I'm a big believer in that. But I had this challenge too. Doing an agency work where we're building ads, designing landing pages, creating follow-up campaigns. Like, I'm a marketing guy. I love marketing. And so that was like my skill, my craft. And so when I had to start getting team members to help out with this stuff, it was a bit painful at the start because, of course, they wouldn't do it to the same level I could. But why would they? I hired junior people with less experience, and also their incentives were not the same as mine. Of course, they were bought into the business and wanted to do well in their role and progress. But like fundamentally, I own the business, I'm the business owner, I'm the one who stands to gain from all of the results that we generate and the revenue that we drive. I've got access to their business bank account. So, I had that unreasonable expectation at the start where I wanted everyone to perform at the same level I would, with the same intensity, ferocity, and of course quality. And that really held me back, and it truthfully caused me a lot of challenges with my early team members. And it took me probably a couple of years to begin to get over that. And as a result, we paid a massive price. Sure, we grew our business, but it did not grow at the rate it could have grown because I was so kind of hyper obsessed on quality control and making sure everything was so good. When instead, if I'd spent that time on revenue driven actions, business would have probably grown a lot more. The way I was able to get over it was to actually understand that there's a process to delegation, a very simple process. Actually the idea of training staff and teaching them how to do all this stuff can be quite stressful because it can feel like a lot of work, but the reality is it doesn't have to be. So the simple process I would do is I would do the task and I would record the task, okay? I would use Loom and I would record and talk out loud everything I was doing whilst I was doing the task. I would then take that loom, put it into AI, turn it into an epic step-by-step playbook. And so we would now have a full step-by-step documentation on how to do this thing and a full video walkthrough. I would then take that playbook and video, give it to the team member, ask them to do the task, and see if the outcome they got was the desired outcome. And if it was, fantastic, playbook sorted, that becomes their responsibility. And if it wasn't, then we'd go back, figure it out, and obviously refine and improve the playbook. But by doing this, it was able to get so much stuff off my plate and to free up more of my time to focus on these revenue-driven actions. And it was a massive unlock because actually, the first time I did this, honestly, it fucking blew my mind. It sounds really simple and stupid now, looking back at it. But the first time I made a playbook and gave it to someone on this task that I honestly thought they would not be able to do anywhere near my level of skill, which is just ridiculous ego talking. And they did it. And you know what? It was fucking better than I could do. And it blew my mind. But more importantly, it blew this limiting belief out the water. And so I then became pretty much addicted to creating these playbooks because I knew every single time I made one of these playbooks, that was the last time I would ever have to do this task. And that is a magical thing, my friends. That is a magical, magical thing. This was what enabled us to break through our revenue plateaus, scale past 100, 120K months, and ultimately, exit the agency. And it's what now at Entrepreneur Circle is just a ruthless focus of mine. Because again, we have a huge team now, nearly 70 staff across our different divisions, and there's a lot of stuff going on. And my role is ultimately facilitating people, making sure they can spend enough time doing revenue-driven actions and creating these playbooks and delegating properly is a big, big part of that. So the final thing I want to talk about is the 3-step calendar system I use. Because, we talked about the time study at the start, but you need to be auditing your time ruthlessly every single week. Because otherwise, let me tell you, businesses are complex, crazy beasts, and all sorts of random work is going to come your way. And you need to stay on top of making sure you're spending time driving revenue. Otherwise, you're going to plateau and stay very flat. So the 3-step system is very simple. I'm a big fan of maximum simplicity. And what I do is I plan my day and plan my week every single week in my Google Calendar because it is the source of truth. And I color code everything green that is a direct revenue-driven action. So if I'm working on ads, scripting new VSLs, follow-up emails, whatever it might be, stuff that directly drives revenue is green. And my goal is 60% of my week at least is on those revenue-driven actions. Then I have things that are yellow. So yellow things in my calendar, these things indirectly drive revenue. And so for me, that is normally meetings, team meetings, catching up with clients, doing debriefs on campaigns, whatever it might be, where I am effectively facilitating and helping other team members prioritize the revenue-driven actions that they need to do. So this is all stuff that's important, but the actual time itself isn't driving revenue, but it is facilitating indirectly revenue to be driven when the teammates go off and execute on that work. So I have normally 30% of my time is spent on that yellow kind of stuff, and that leaves us to the final stuff, the red stuff. So the red stuff is the admin stuff, okay? This is the £10 an hour work that still comes up. I still do some reluctantly and regretfully, and my goal is to have sub 10% of red stuff in my calendar. And when that creeps up, I know I've got to make some playbooks because my time is now being spent in an inefficient manner. But this simple system helps me stay on top every single week and just visually, at a glance, understand if I'm being effective and actually driving revenue or if I'm being ineffective. And it's an important thing to build into the culture of a business because, again, as you grow, as you have lots of staff, like us now, around 70 staff, the big challenge is there's so much stuff going on. It is making sure everyone understands within their roles what are their core revenue-driven actions, what are the things that they do that indirectly drive revenue, and also what are the things that are the admin stuff that actually, yes, need to be done for sure as it's important, but are way less priority versus the green and yellow things. So we've talked about the time study that we did and how that led to a massive revelation that 50% of the time of these 6-figure closes was being spent on £10 an hour work and the massive impact that had once we were able to fix it. We talked about the difference between £10 an hour and £1,000 an hour work, and I gave you the 3-step simple calendar system that hopefully you'll find useful so you can stay on top of your time every single week and make sure it is driving revenue. Hope you found that useful. I make these videos because I just find this stuff really interesting and I like talking about it, so hopefully you got some value from it as well. If you want my help on anything, links in the description. Peace and love. Have a tremendous day.